Coming up.
In this contemporary age, people are looking to leverage a lot more data-centric information, while not forgetting the fact that, when all else fails, the one thing that people feel secure with is the voice at the end of the line. We all put our lives in the hands of these people. They run towards danger when we're trying to get help or to retreat. And, it's really important we make sure our critical agencies have that level of capability. It's not just about the technology implementation. It's ensuring all of the users are trained and can leverage that capability. And, it's really critical in mission situations where, these users don't want to have to think about how to use the technology. They just want to speak, and they need to choose a path with the right governance, with the right technology architecture. So they end up with this connectivity fabric, which prevails whether they're on narrowband, broadband, or a non-terrestrial. Narrowband's not going away for a long time. It's going to take nations a decade or more to be able to fully transition some of their capability. Especially those that are yet to sort of even define their strategy for their future broadband requirements.
Welcome to Making Waves, the podcast where we explore the technology, people, and real-world challenges shaping the world of critical communications. From PMR radio to next-gen broadband, we talk to industry experts and frontline users to uncover the pain points, innovations, and decisions that define performance under pressure. If it keeps teams connected when it matters most, we'll be talking about it here. I'm Stuart with my co-host Lona.
Hello.
And this is Making Waves. So, Lona, what do we have today?
When the mission can't fail, the technology can't either. Today we're speaking with someone who's been shaping critical communications for more than 3 decades. Kevin Graham is the CEO of TCCA and a long-standing advocate for standards, interoperability, and resilient global solutions. With over 30 years in critical communications, he's now leading the TCCA through the transition into the mission-critical broadband era, helping ensure that the technology organizations rely on is ready when it matters most. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you both for the opportunity.
We're so glad to have you here. Before we start, could you just shortly introduce yourself and your role at TCCA?
Yeah, thanks, Lena. My role in TCCA is a global CEO. So I'm very lucky to work with an international community of member organizations, including Blind People at DAM, across the world as we try and continue to deliver capability to critical industry sectors. It's been part of my career since even before I graduated. So I've spent my whole career working in these sectors and alongside some, fine organizations and especially working really closely with end users, who is, really the reason we do what we do and why we strive to do better.
Excellent. I think we're going to get a really interesting episode, Kevin. I'm looking forward to getting into this, and I think we'll touch on various different topics, but some of that just come to mind. We'll be talking, no doubt, about standards, the global direction of the industry in general, interoperability perhaps, maybe a little bit about the MCX transition. And if you have any kind of anecdotes about some real-world experiences and there's some of the priorities that they're looking at, that would be kind of useful for the listeners as well. Okay, so let's dive in then. For the listeners that may not actually recognize the scale of the TCCA's role, how would you describe it in terms of its global state of mission-critical communications in today's world? And what are the challenges that you see or you hear that agencies are facing during this kind of LMR to broadband evolution, let's call it?
Since the very early days, 30 years ago when TCCA was formed to work with users to create the TETRA narrowband standard, things have come a long way. And, agencies still, and critical industries and even more, still rely on these digital narrowband standards for their daily operations. But it's, quite clear that in this contemporary age, people are looking to leverage a lot more data-centric information, while not forgetting the fact that, when all else fails, the one thing that people, feel secure with is the voice at the end of the line. And, I think that's that puts into sort of context, where we've been and, what the future looks like in terms of bringing together both voice-centric and data-centric capability. And, to that end, TCCA, alongside some of our peer associations that have looked after other standards have been working really closely to make sure that the broadband experience can deliver the same sorts of secure, trusted comms and connectivity that they've enjoyed with their narrowband standards, while delivering, a whole rich list of functionality that they haven't been able to enjoy, but, general citizens do. And, it's really important we make sure our critical agencies have that level of capability. We all put our lives in the hands of these people. They run towards danger when, we're trying to get help or to retreat, and also in the rehabilitation. So I think this is a really important topic. And as you say, this is an evolution that's going on now. While, users rely on their narrowband networks while they chart a course to overlay broadband, and we'll see, very shortly the integration of non-terrestrial capability as well. So, we do need to see this as an evolution, and that evolution will take its course with different organizations and agencies depending on where they are in their current journey. And it's really important that, from the entire stakeholder perspective, that we provide pathways to that evolution. And there are a lot of factors that affect that we need to be cognizant of, and the end users and the agencies and organizations that look after them in respect to connectivity need to take into account.
So along that path of determining, how do I go from the trusted voice through to, as you said, the voice plus the feature-rich environment that we're moving towards, and with the different agencies involved, what's your kind of view on why the standardization of the common standards matter approach is the way forward, as opposed to people going off in their own unique and self-interested ways? Why do we need a common way forward through standards, open standards?
As I mentioned before, I think it's fairly evident that organizations and users are going to be relying on multiple technologies and solutions, connectivity solutions, to deliver the future capability. And the capability they're expecting now, and some are already using now. So the ecosystem for the solutions becomes a lot more complex. And standards is one way of simplifying that. If you can standardize the system elements, the architectures, the interfaces, then you bring some level of probability of success that these things will interoperate. And secondly, that also fosters a rich multi-vendor capability across the ecosystem. And we're looking at multiple layers now, from both network infrastructure, command and control, all the way through to devices with applications, with back-end capability to deal with massive mission-critical video. So when you look at the complexity of information, the delivery of that information to the right people, with the right credentials, with your right authorities, with the right security, you have to have some foundation of standards to make sure that all comes together.
And how do you see the value of this, the TCCA's approach towards interoperability testing widening to capture all these disparate types of technology?
Look, I think we've proven through the interoperability programs that have existed with technologies like TETRA, P25, and also with DMR, that interoperability is really crucial to ensuring that end users can have confidence in the network operators that devices will work in a predictable way. And consequently, we do need to ensure that we move, and the users are expecting it, and the network operators are expecting some of this, that as we evolve these users, overlay broadband, non-terrestrial, that we have a regime in place that gives them confidence that predictability will still exist no matter which network they're connected via.
I think you make a good point. It's going to become even more critical when we enter into the hybrid future, where you have this mix of LMR, you've got LTE, you've got 4G leading onto 5G, as you mentioned. The extraterrestrial, the satellite-based communications that we're starting to see requirements more and more to get this almost unified kind of capability in critical communications. Let's take one step back and just talk a little bit about the absolute thing that we see more and more today, and that's the TETRA longevity versus the readiness of MCX today. What are your views on where we are with that right now?
Look, I think we've demonstrated now with the involvement of cross industry with the broadband community that we now have product on-ramps that can deliver capability. I think the challenge is ensuring that those that are planning and deploying these networks are fully aware of all of the elements of the ecosystem that need to come together in a coordinated fashion to leverage these capabilities that are evolving and will continue to evolve because the standards are continuing to evolve. And I think, what's really important is that we also recognize it's not just about the technology implementation and having the connectivity availability. It's ensuring all of the users are trained and can leverage that capability. And I think, that's one of the big elements of this that's so important in the adoption and the harvesting of the benefits of these additional solutions is so important. And, it's really critical in mission situations where, these users don't want to have to think about how to use or how to switch or how to engage the technology. They just want to speak. They just want to have their situational awareness seamlessly conveyed and orchestrated in a way that makes their job easier. So I see these elements being, more constraining than actually the evolution of the technology. But having said that, I think governments or organizations need to set about what their short and long-term outcomes are for their user community, whether it's multi-agency or multi-department or whatever. And they need to choose a path with the right governance, with the right technology architecture. So they end up with this connectivity fabric, which prevails whether they're on narrowband, broadband, or non-terrestrial. And I think a few of the challenges we have at the moment are around the seamless connectivity between the individual technologies. And I think this is where our industry, one, needs to agree on harmonizing the interworking standards and then commercializing those in a way that creates that seamless mobility. These are the aspirations of a lot of countries, federated nations. We're seeing it in Europe, individual nations augmenting their nationwide narrowband multi-agency with broadband, with a view to ultimately transitioning. Over the top of that, you have the pan-European ambition to establish European-wide PPDR response public safety capability, where you have roaming and interoperability at borders. So these are the specific areas where I think we need to devote quite a bit more effort to deliver the end use cases that users requiring in those situations.
Kevin, I think you already touched a little upon it right now, but TCA has visibility across regions deploying mission-critical systems differently. What regional trends or lessons stand out to you as the world moves at different speeds toward broadband?
I think we can separate the global trends to those that revolve around government public safety requirements and implementations, and those that address other critical industry verticals such as utilities, public transport, and then you've got all the private use cases as well. So you're quite right. We're seeing different models emerge for delivery of that hybrid capability. But in a lot of nations, they are now trying to look at how they set up a federal capability that allows agencies to operate in their own manner and way, but having this connectivity fabric that allows that interoperability to occur when missions determine it. And I think that's becoming quite a universal trend across the governments. Many are now dealing with national disaster management and heightening sort of risks as we see that those threats occurring more frequently. The same things applying in terms of, other threats that nations and countries are now facing. From a public transport perspective, we're seeing the same evolution occurring as we see technologies like GSMR end of life. So there's a lot of, national rail operations that are charting their course from their present networks, whether they be narrowband, TETRA networks in a metro context or national rail networks towards a 5G convergence that a standardized future mobile rail communication system. So now we're seeing those trends emerge in transport. Utilities is another one. They again are looking at how they modernize their grid, how they deliver sustainability goals. And the only way they're going to do a lot of that is to actually implement new smart grid technology. And that seems to be a trend across utilities. And you look at the oil and gas and other energy sectors, and there's a lot of alignment across the world. So it makes sense that we try and aggregate all of those requirements and harmonise them wherever possible, whether that's from a legal and regulatory policy perspective, whether it's from a spectrum access perspective, and also sort of looking at novel ways in which we can share networks more than has happened in the past. And a lot of countries still operate siloed networks in their various agencies. So they have an opportunity to, sort of leapfrog into a multi-organisational interoperability capability.
I think you've touched on a few different things there. Let me pick on one in particular. You talked about the national response in some jurisdictions to disaster management because there are just more risks out there now. And we're seeing that in various different forms from the kind of almost more global conflict, country-to-country conflict versus terrorism versus other disasters such as climate change. In all of those different kind of user groups, there will be different requirements going forward. And you did also mention that there is a spectrum management perspective here as well. How do you see that being affected going forward? The availability of spectrum and the grab because of international or national needs on some of those other groups that you've mentioned, like the utilities and the other kind of more industry and business type users. Where do you see that or the potential for impact? Where do you see that in particular?
I think the first thing we were talking before about aligning standards. So if you have nations look at aligning their standards, then it opens up a lot of options for how they could bring together capability, both for individual organisations, government, transport, utilities, and so on. And as you know, many nations now have contracted with mobile network operators to deliver the broadband capability. So we need to sort of recognise that there is a spectrum need, one by mobile network operators if they're going to deliver the grade of service that some of them are now offering to our mission critical customers. There's a need for spectrum where they are unable to provide that service, or whether in instance where the service goes down, or for agencies to be able to work off network in disaster situations. So we need to cater for those capabilities, and we shouldn't forget as well that our narrowband users in most organisations have been used to having a fallback mode, which if all else fails, they can communicate directly with each other in direct mode. We need to make sure we've got that equivalent capability, and that's work we're doing in the standards, but that also means we need to provision spectrum. Then you look at regions where mobile network operators may not be willing to give the grade of service required by some of these verticals, then you need to be in a position to have spectrum availability at an affordable rate that can then be used to support these other vertical critical industry sectors. And consequently, we're seeing requirements to make sure that national rail and metro rails have access to dedicated spectrum, utilities and some of these other sectors are requiring it. And then you look to the other industrial end of the market, oil, gas, mining, manufacturing, they also have a need for spectrum. And again, we're seeing combinations of delivery of this connectivity blending. Mobile network operators in some instances being allowed to provide private networks with their spectrum and vice versa. So, this whole spectrum area needs to be elaborated in every country. We need to try and harmonise our work up through the various ITU regions to ensure that the end use cases have a spectrum availability that well utilised and not underutilised. And I think the technologies that are coming on board now lend themselves to a lot of opportunities for spectrum sharing. And in some cases, that means that government policy and regulation around this needs to be looked at more closely from, where it sits from very historical grounds. So a lot of work to do to try and align these things.
It sounds like the workload is just mushroomed in some ways because we're now pushing in all different directions. Three-dimensional kind of modeling here required in terms of, you've got national requirements, you've got international potential sharing and collaboration as well, not just between countries at a kind of public safety or military level, but also on the business and industry side. But your work is cut out for you Kevin, I would say in this respect. Given what you've said, the harmonization of the different technologies and bringing it all together, if we look at what's here today, there's a lot of noise about broadband replacing more traditional types of LMR, PMR out there. The reality is, of course, though, it's much more nuanced than that, as you've just been explaining. So where do you see a long-term role for the narrowband technologies like the TETRAs, like the P25s, and to some extent the DMRs as well, in their space of critical communications? You've already touched on some of it, but specifically for those technologies, where do you see the future? What's your view, bearing in mind it is just one piece of the puzzle now, but it is an important piece.
Look, I think given the level of deployment across a number of nations, the commitment and support for narrowband technologies like TETRA is going to prevail. And all of the market analyst forecasts that we have show that there's going to be continued compound annual growth in narrowband digital open standard technologies. We know that there'll be a heightened uptake of broadband, but equally, industry is continuing to develop the technologies. And, I think we will see in all of the verticals that have been serviced by these narrowband networks, they're going to prevail for quite some time. And even in nations that may have taken a decision that they will transition from their narrowband technologies when they have a broadband alternative that meets all the user requirements in place. We know from evidence in those countries that have already adopted and have operational networks, this is a multi-year exercise. And, it's going to take nations a decade or more to be able to fully transition some of their capability. Especially those that are yet to sort of even define their strategy for their future broadband requirements. And we're still seeing, in the absence of maturity in some of the end-to-end ecosystem, there are a lot of greenfield situations that need to be serviced with a solution. Meanwhile, so around the world, and you can see ongoing implementation of new narrowband networks to service industry needs where they don't have an alternative available already to service those needs now. And look, examples of this, New Zealand's just rolling out a nationwide P25 network. States in Australia, my homeland, have just refreshed or expanded their narrowband networks. And we've seen refreshes in other nations of their infrastructure. In a lot of cases, there's been refreshment of their subscriber units. And I think what we're seeing now is the advent of some multi-mode devices are starting to deliver some additional options for those that may want to overlay broadband, may want to operate hybrid for many years, or are in a process of and have a strategy in place to transition from narrowband. Narrowband's not going away for a long time. And in fact, as evidence inside TCCA, our interoperability work, our technical forum work is more active than ever. And you see similar things happening in P25 and DMR. And organisations are still investing in R&D for these technologies. So, you don't do that if you don't think technology has a 10-year lifespan or more.
That's true. How is TCCA helping operators plan for long-term evolution and sustainability?
Obviously, there's a lot of engagement. You've got the government public safety operator groups that have been delivering national or agency-based narrowband solutions. We've got a lot of collaboration going on now with the public carriers. We've got a growing list of mobile network operators who are now part of TCCA's community and actively working with us to chart a course forward for interconnectivity, between the technologies. And I just see that cooperation growing stronger and stronger, and it needs to. We talk about the need for us to aggregate scale across the world. I mean, we are just a fraction of the global consumer and enterprise telecom market. So, we have to work together with these other stakeholders to be able to deliver capability at scale across the world. And, I just see the level of effort going on and collaboration between peer associations with TCCA, mobile network operators, and particularly the government public safety operators who are also cooperating government to government to share their best practice in delivering capability and understanding what the options are for implementation and usage of that technology by end users.
Given what you've said, what would you particularly point to as successes, specific successes that you could point to from certain groups or countries, and where do you see the gap? What is clearly falling between the chairs, as it were, for you? Are there any things that leap out at you that work needs to be done, or is particularly well done in certain places?
Look, I think, the leading examples around the world that you can point to from a government public safety perspective is obviously the rollout of the FirstNet authority network capability with AT&T. You look to the rollout that has happened in South Korea, where they're providing 3 networks to service marine, transport, and public safety, dedicated spectrum as dedicated networks. You've seen a similar thing in the Middle East, where the existing ministries of interior have been using TETRA for years. They now all have pathways to deliver mission critical capability. We're seeing in France, in Finland, operational users now working on those networks as they are in Middle East, Korea, and in USA. So I think we can be really encouraged by these pathfinding projects that momentum's building. This is becoming reality. And now most of the effort needs to be put into ensuring all of the interoperability between the networks delivers the sort of rich functionality that has the capability of doing. And there's a lot of work that needs to go in to make sure that command and control centers, that all the data-rich features can be orchestrated over the networks, that the information can be delivered in a secure manner to the right organisations, the right individuals who have authority to see that information. And that, that also requires us to ensure that national policy, government policy in these areas around net neutrality that gives public safety priority and preemption to get on a network, data privacy and some of these other areas support the use of that data by agencies that need it. CCTV, facial recognition, video available through body-worn cameras in more context than just public safety as well. But they bring with it a whole range of, let's say, path clearing we need to do from a legal and regulatory perspective. And these are some of the things that we need to do early on. I think, we can get the technologies to roll out and evolve. If you don't have the government policy, spectrum policy, whatever, well set out early enough, then they will be the things that will hold up the consumption and harvesting of the investments in this connectivity. I don't see this as a standards issue, a technology issue, or a roadmap issue. It's very clear from all of the vendors we work with. They're involved in NETC plug tests. They're behind us in terms of driving open standards, open interfaces, interoperability, certification. So there's, we've got the major suppliers around the world that are all supporting and doing work in these areas, inside 3GPP standards, inside TCCA from a TETRA perspective, inside the US from a P25 perspective. And now we're seeing work that has to be done in respect to the non-terrestrial, bringing that capability into our users in a seamless way.
Let me just quickly take you back to MCX. How are operators and end users responding to these changes required by MCX around training and just the workflow adaptation?
It's been challenging for a number of agencies, including private organisations and industries, to fully understand and comprehend the options that are possible. And it's been challenging to ensure that industry and the stakeholders engage in useful information exchange so that we can help end users understand the options they have. What are the pathways that are available to them? And most importantly, the end users need to help us understand what they believe their future end use requirements are. I mean, they are always critical in prioritising the work we do and prioritising the work that we have to do inside 3GPP and other standards bodies with spectrum regulators, because ultimately it's all about delivering the right capability to meet those end user missions.
You've answered quite a lot of the questions we were going to put to you. I was going to ask you about, which emerging technologies, in your view, should we keep an eye on? But you've kind of gone through the evolution. You've painted the picture of what we have today, what we're going to, and what's coming in terms of extraterrestrial, and the need for the seamless connection. So, and you've also talked a little bit about what the agencies need to do, and why the standards approach is the way to go for all of this to work. If I could just kind of push that all together and consolidate it and ask you this one question, what is the one thing that you would say to agencies that they really do need to focus on the preparation for this future to become a reality for them?
I think firstly, the individual agencies need to understand what their requirements are going into the future. What will make their operational capability more efficient, more effective, more responsive? Then you need to look at overarching government perspective. What are the ways in which governments could put together a roadmap with the appropriate governance that allows these individual agencies to flourish and work in the ways they need to work, because there are differences across different agencies in their missions. But ultimately, if the governments need to try and put in place this connectivity fabric, that, as I call it, that allows whatever agency to have the connectivity it needs to build the applications and the ecosystem support it, but that can interface together in an interoperable fashion. And so there's a lot of information exchange has to go on with both governments and the individual agencies from an operational and a technical perspective. And I think this is one of the important roles that TCCA and similar organisations are trying to do. How do we facilitate that knowledge exchange and ensure that governments are making prudent decisions about how they can deliver the connectivity outcomes, and more importantly, the functionality outcomes for the end users? And, this can't be done in silos. The solutions can't be done by one organisation anymore. And I think once people recognise that all of the stakeholders need to come together to understand and chart a course consistent with their capability, and also look at how they can partner across the world with both international suppliers and encourage the skill and capability within their own nations. It's really important that all of these things happen.
And you are a part of it. You talked about the TCCA's role in all of this. And just while you were talking, I was thinking to myself, not everyone is going to be so familiar with the TCCA. So maybe I could just throw it open. This is your opportunity for a little kind of advertisement for the TCCA. Explain a little bit about the upcoming events, the working groups, the papers. Just give us, for the listeners, a flavour of what you have to offer as the TCCA.
Well, look, we've been very fortunate. We've got a broad base of membership that spans just about all the different stakeholder groups, from government side, industry, applications, network devices, chipset manufacturers, through to consultants and advisors. And really fortunate that they all come together, and we prioritize most of our work based around end user needs. And then practitioners come together, experts, to work on different working groups and on different tasks that have been identified as priorities for our members, but also the broader community. So everything from legal and regulatory to technical aspects to standards aspects. And we do that with a really broad base of experts from a whole group of stakeholders. And I think that's the best part about being part of the TCCA. You've got competitors that come together, work together to deliver, harmonised outcomes or advices and white papers, content in webinars, and bring this information to our major events as well. Yet once they're outside the collaboration of TCCA, it's, competition on the field is normal. So I think we've got a really, really lovely community that works across the world. A couple of events coming up that really encourage people to consider, where critical communications and our whole industry will be represented. One is obviously the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. There's a number of our people assembling. We work closely with GSMA and the mobile network operators, and now supporting our end user community. Follow on from that, BAPCO is another one we'll be at in UK, IWCE in the US. Then we have our first regional critical comms event in Asia being held in Hong Kong on the 22nd to 23rd of April, which will be followed the day after by another global certification workshop forum. And then obviously our major event, as is always the case every year, is the Critical Comms World being held in London. And we're really lucky this year that it is being hosted by the Home Office and ESN. A project that's been in the spotlight for many years, but I think there'll be some really, really interesting updates and sharings that come from that experience in London. So I really encourage anyone who wants to learn something about critical communications, no matter where you are in an organization, sales, marketing, technical, whatever, that's where you can meet all of the players, including DAM and all of the narrowband and broadband and non-terrestrial players. Yeah, I really encourage people, if they want to come in and have a look, come to one of the events, talk to some of your vendors who are already members, and just see what their view is of the collaboration that goes on both inside the TCCA and also the great list of partnering associations that we have affiliations, from utilities, telecoms councils to BAPCO to industry standards bodies, 3GPP, ETSI, go through the list. All available on our website, and we're always welcoming new members from all the sectors. Yeah, so behind me, www.tcca.info. All the events are listed there. They'll take you to all the event programs. You'll get access to all of the white papers. You'll see what some of the working groups are doing. Wealth of information on that site.
Kevin, that was fantastic. So much for your insights. I'm conscious of time, so we'll draw this one to a close here. Let me try and recap some of the things. We've talked about the global perspective on mission critical communications today in general. We've looked at the value of the TCCA and the standards approach that you mentioned, the interoperability process, which is so important as we work towards that unified and harmonized inter-technology approach in terms of the different technologies, narrowband, broadband, hybrid, interterrestrial, extraterrestrial even. We've talked a little bit about the future of LMR, particularly TETRA, but it's the truth for the other narrowband technologies as well. They're going to be around for a long time because, as you say, people are at different points of their cycle right now. So some are even refreshing and their fleets and going for new deployments. So it's not a one fixes everything for everybody approach. We talked a little bit about what the government is doing, the operators, and what the vendors are doing part of the process so that they are committed to these different technologies for the foreseeable future in terms of design and development. We've talked a little bit about what the successes are, particularly around the world, and what you saw as the gaps that still need addressing. We've talked a little bit about what's needed over the next decades or time to come, at least, and the vision for critical communications as you see it going into the future and being part of that as the TCCA. We've wrapped a lot of things up in the short amount of time, then. I thank you so much for that. I just invite the listeners to reflect on some of these and maybe even listen again. You can follow the TCCA. They're on LinkedIn as well. I'm sure if you reach out to Kevin, he'll be more than glad to either hook up with you on LinkedIn or point you towards somebody that would be more appropriate for your particular request. Like we said before, there's lots of events and white papers and working groups. So there's lots of information coming out all the time. So I'd really encourage anyone to look into the TCCA more. If you found this interesting, then why not subscribe? We're available on all of the major podcast platforms. And by virtue of recording this in video, we're available on YouTube as well. Just to make it very easy for you, we've put all the links on the DAM website, damcellular.com/podcast. Okay, so that's it for today. I'd just like to thank our special guest, Kevin Graham, today.
Thanks for having me. Great service you're providing. Anything that gets the world talking about critical comms is wonderful. And thank you for your long-standing support as a valued member of TCCA. DAM has always been really proactive in our and our activities. And this is just another example of the service you're providing across the world. Really appreciate this opportunity.
If we were still sending checks through the post, I'd send one to you there. That was brilliant. Thank you very much for that. And I'd just like to thank also Lona for being my co-host this week.
Thank you, Kevin, and goodbye.
That's it for another episode of Making Waves. I've been Stuart, and that's another one wrapped up. So until next time, goodbye.